And it seems to me that before governing our emotions, we need to be aware of them. And that if I'm unconscious, for me, that's just as important as being enthusiastic, if I'm stuck in unconsciousness.
If you're
and
stuck,
whatever the emotion is,
if you're stuck in numbness,
that's very real for
that
me.
numbness we have to get in touch with and learn how to cope with it and deal with it.
Yeah.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. So my point of view is that we need to be able to feel our feelings as a starting point.
We can't reason until we do.
Yeah. Thank you.
But the thing is we still have to govern ourselves in our reasoning or our feelings according to law. Because most people are governed by emotion and they're not governed by principle. Shall we say all people? We're all there. And we all do what feels good to us without any rationale connected to it and not looking at the repercussions of what will happen if we keep having our bowl of ice cream every evening, or our, you know what I mean. Our creature comforts that give us momentary feelings of good joy.
That's not emotions. That's fleeting feelings.
That's emotion.
That's indulgence. For me, that's indulgence.
What's indulgence? What's lust? What's eating? What's sleeping? What's sexing? If they're all feelings, these are all emotions.
They're actions.
Huh?
They're actions.
You try to tell people that are engaged in sexual activity that that's just actions, and you try to tell them that's not emotions.
So there can be a whole range of emotions related to sexual activity.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of it can just be lust. That's doing. There's no emotion in that.
That's still a feeling.
It's an emotion, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm feeling lustful. Yeah, that's real. But that's only one. That's only one of a number of emotions that can be very valid at the time.
Okay, you take the central portion of the central nervous system. Let's go to the medulla, which is the primitive emotions that govern man. Eating, survival, sex, and all of these primitive emotions and primitive drives come right out of that medulla area.
I dispute that they're feelings or emotions. They're actions. Eating, having sex, what was the other one? Protection. Certainly they're primitive.
Survival.
Survival, yeah.
The drive to survive. Would you say a drive is an emotion, or would you say that exists outside of emotionality?
Yeah, I think that's a drive. That's an action.
That's an action. You don't think it's an emotion. Then why do they call it primitive emotions?
I don't know who they are.
Okay, this is probably, we're dealing with semantics now, but I think we can agree that all these things exist, and they're all put into a category of emotional activity that governs our survival, governs the propagation of the species, governs our desire level, our desire for food. Is that an emotion or a desire? Or can you separate it from an emotion?
Well, I guess being hungry is a feeling.
It's a feeling, and this is the feelings is what we're speaking of.
Rather than an emotion.
Okay, how can you separate that from an emotion? When you're hungry, and you want to eat, and you want to eat now. What? But that's tied into the hunger drive. See, there's a subtle line here that I don't think I can draw or differentiate, wherein a drive no longer is an emotion. I don't think you can have a drive without emotion. See, there are three things. There's thought, which is sensory experience. There are feelings, which are emotions. And there are verbal expressions. And so we have to look at those three categories. And that's the only three things behind creative work, creative effort. There are no more. Tom?
I think in this decade there's been teachings which have encouraged people to follow their feelings. And if there's an attachment to feelings, that's a very dangerous course. And for me, it's a dangerous course to follow feelings. You know, follow your feelings, go with the flow, all these sort of new agey kind of expressions. And I think there's a real danger in that.
Dangerous is destructive.
Yeah.
Because people go according to their feelings and they have no sense of responsibility for their feelings or the effects of what they do after they have fully indulged in their feelings. It's a total destructive effort on the part of the New Age people, because they're going into channeling and getting all of this stuff coming from the astral realm, and the channeling says then through all these different channels, do what you feel like doing and do it now. And that's terribly destructive to the soul.
Yes, I think it's a place for promiscuity. You know, follow your feelings, and the teachings that have been understood to encourage promiscuity is a prime example of this. And I think that if one can distinguish between what we said is a primary urge and a feeling which is just reactionary, and to me it's the attachment to the emotion that's got to be dealt with. You know, if I'm attached to sadness, I'll see sadness everywhere. If I have a love of God, I'll see God everywhere. That's all.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Please, Mama, you help me.
Well, does that apply, John, to, like, people say, go within and feel what's inside rather than going with what you're saying with your head, intellectualizing?
You need to have a balance between your head and your heart. Most people do not. They are encouraged, just do what your heart tells you to do, and don't reason things out as to what the after effects are going to be. You have a lot of people today who are acting according to their heart. They're being true to their heart, and they're acting according to their heart, and they get themselves in so many messes that they'll never get themselves out of it this lifetime. Now, we need to logically look at these things and not just allow ourselves to be governed by our heart. There's a danger there. Our feelings. Because our feelings will, if we follow by our feelings without reason as to the end result of our activity, we get ourselves into a pack of trouble. Now, conscience, which is culturally or genetically perpetuated, that's another thing. Because we should act according to our conscience. But the conscience will vary from one civilization to another, from one group of people to another. And that is completely different again from conducting our life by the Spirit of God, which is different from our emotions.
I find a little sort of a grey area there for myself. I just don't...
I think that's true for all of us. There's a gray area. That's why we're still in mortal bodies. We haven't survived yet.
I know one of the greatest works you can do... Sorry, Ingrid. Are you waiting? No. Okay. Oh, you are? Okay. One of the greatest things it says in the I Am is to control your feelings. And they tell you that everyone can control their feelings. And I forget which discourse it is, but it says in there that there's no excuse for people not to control their feelings. So this is where I believe you have to go back to commitment and intent. You know, renew your commitment every morning to what you're doing with your life and what is your purpose in life, and renew your commitment to God. And by doing that, then you won't be acting out of a feeling. If something happens during the day, then you won't be acting out of a feeling. You'll be going by your commitment and your intent. And maybe that's where there's that gray area, because we do have all kinds of feelings during the day. You know, everything that happens, you have some feeling about it or you have some thought about it, and then if you have that commitment and intent to your higher self, to God, that keeps you more on track.
Let's look at this a different way. You have a lot of people that don't want to assume responsibility for their own life. A lot of people don't want to. But they'd be very tickled to go to a seance and put their whole life's direction under the guidance of somebody coming from the astral realm who channels a lot of information through these seance, and they tell them, you do this, and you do this, and you do this, and everything will be beautiful. I haven't found that to be true. And yet you have people who would give their lives for the information that they got from these seances that they go to. Now, let me give you a little illustration. Scoot up, Hank. There you go. See this white beard? I had that turn white overnight. And I got scared spitless when I had a group of about 20 people chasing me with guns trying to end my life for me. I got scared spitless. This happened in the grand old state of Pennsylvania. This one fellow came up to me who was a kind of a questionable character that was taking a seminar. And he said he was told that I had to join his group. I said, I don't even know anything about your group. He says, well, Jesus told me to deliver you a message that you had to join my group. I said, well, Jesus hasn't told me that. I'm sure if this was such an important thing that I would have been told that, not just you. And so it was. And I put him off. And then he came and told me again, he said, now look, we had a seance last night, and Jesus appeared in the seance, and he appeared with half a body, just a bust and eyes and head, right in front of everybody, and everyone saw him there, and Jesus said that I was supposed to join the group, and that I was supposed to come and tell you this. And he brought several other witnesses of this seance that he had gone to, where this half of a man appeared in a seance, and first thing, a half a man never appears in a seance. If somebody comes to you, they come to you as a whole body. They don't come as half a man. And I told him that. Well, he didn't like that at all. I told him I didn't want to have anything more to do with this. I said, I'm doing what I'm doing, you're doing what you're doing, and you're entitled to do what you're doing, but I don't believe that what you're doing is coming from God. Well, the next thing he told me, he said, you either join our group, and Jesus said that we're going to have to kill you if you don't. And all the group came, firearms were there and all that bit. And I just put my stuff out in the car, and at the end of the seminar, and I dug out. And I made it over into Maryland, scared spitless. Never went back to my motel or anything. My beard turned from dark black, turned white. I got scared. Several days in Maryland, Delaware. Working again? Must be in the lead. Okay, several days in Delaware and Maryland area, and I finally came back, and I found out what was going on in Pennsylvania. The Attorney General had been called. People were out hunting for me. These 20 people were going from house to house, and everyone at the seminar, by force, entering the house, threatening all the people there, threatening them all, that if they were so much as talk to me ever or have me in their home, then every one of them would be killed. Because I had to be killed because I wasn't doing what Jesus wanted. Now, these people were totally dedicated to what they were doing. They believed in their seance. Now, this sort of stuff does exist, and I could go into situation after situation after situation where these things are going. And people are being true to their heart. They're being true to their feelings. But they're not operating on correct principle. You follow what I'm saying? They think they are. But you've got this sort of thing. You've got a whole lot of devil worshippers out there. You've got a whole lot of people that are into these seances, and they do every little thing the imps tell them to do. Is that tweaking their nose? It sure is. They're imps. That's what they are. They're from the astral realm. They have no good in them because all they want to do is to control and direct other people's lives. Is that clear enough? Now let's look and call a spade a spade. And so, are these people governed by their emotions? Yes, but they're certainly not governed by reason and logic. Now, this is the sort of thing you are all going to run into when you put your foot into the pool of truth. And every one of you will be tested to the limit in one area or another. And you're going to have to understand that these things do exist out there, and there might be a time when you're going to have to kind of be a little wise and run for your life, rather than sit there and put your head in the lion's mouth and tweak the tail. All right? Now, as I go back and have my points held, and I remember the fear that I had, which I suppressed totally while I was trying to figure out what am I going to do here for the highest and best good of everybody involved, I couldn't come up with any good reason or any good logic. I had to get the hell out of there and just preserve my corpus delicti. And I thought for sure I had been found about 5 or 6 different times, and I was really a little bit disturbed over that. I couldn't sleep at night for weeks afterward because I didn't know who was going to point their doggone rifle in the window and pop me off. And so I went from place to place where I didn't think anybody would find and just take a little pillow and sleep in a corner somewhere. Hey, listen, folks, this is serious business we're in. You think that it's funny. You better think it's funny if it happened to you. And you had a bunch of crazy people out there attending a seance where some half a man from the astral realm was coming out and saying he was Jesus, lying to everybody and telling them to go out and kill me. That is a true situation. Now, think of all the people like yourselves who are out there with people coming to your home threatening you if you have anything to do with me. You think that's fun too? All these people were my friends. They wrote me letters and say, John, I don't know what to do about this, but the whole family is scared. My children are scared. Everyone's scared spitless. These people are crazy. And the truth of the matter is they are. I don't know if you ever got wind of that, Doug. Did you?
That's not in '88. That was way before then?
Way before then. But that happened. And it's enough to scare you spitless. But after a while, he moved down to Florida, and then we went back into Pennsylvania. And that's when we had our, things that happened with a different nature, and we're able to handle it then. Well, I'll tell you, folks, when we are talking about being governed by feelings, you had better know where your feelings are coming from. You had better know where your heart is coming from. And you better start learning your logic and learning your principles and learning the laws that govern them. Otherwise, you are likely to be deceived. And that comes the hard way. And that's why I'm trying to say you can't be saved, so to speak, in this work without a whole lot of knowledge. Otherwise, you'd be bumped around and ground around by people coming from the astral realm, coming from shamanism and other type of people that have their seances and have all kinds of weird things coming through their dark doors. I think I've made my statement. That's on tape. Tom, you have something you want to say, sir?
I'd just like to clarify what I was saying before, in that, for me, love is not a feeling. For me, a feeling is in the realms of a distortion of the past or a speculation of the future. There's attachment with it. And when we're talking about hunger or primal drives, to me they are a sensation. Like hunger for me is a sensation. An appropriate response to that sensation is to ingest food that will sustain me. It's not a feeling. And I think it helps if we get our terms quite clear to distinguish the two. Because when we realize, for me, when I realize that love is not a feeling, it's a state of my being, irrespective of the circumstances of my life, or the person. If I'm going to direct my feeling to one and not another, it's certainly not love. That's in the world of feelings, in the world of preference, in the world of choice and judgment, which are alienated from an expression of my truth or my love.
You are certainly entitled to your opinion, sir. But when you look at the definitions of love, love is law, love is light, love is the law that governs all things, and you take a good close look at this whole situation, love is the all-encompassing aspect of feeling. Because it's the law of love which transmutes the entire emotional body. That's where enthusiasm, the God in you, the love in you, according to the ancient Greek translations. Now this is where in love, then, is the highest order of feeling, the highest order of emotionality, which circumscribes all other emotions.
Quite a lot of phrases there that sit very well with me. It's just that, for me, an emotion lacks truth. It's a response. If I'm not true to the situation, for me, I'm being emotional about it. If I'm true to the situation, I'm able to access not a cultural conscience, but consciousness. So if I'm able to act from a place of consciousness rather than a cultured thing, like conscience, which is just going to depend on my belief system and my geography of birth and so on, then there's some integrity in my life. So that the emotion for me is not the true part of my life. It's the part for me, which I see myself reacting to. I react to a situation when I'm not true to it. I'm emotional towards it. So I suppose a lot of what you said I've got really sits very well with me, and I enjoy you saying it.
Can you see that anything less than love would be reactive? Then we're in harmony. Anything less than love would have the human creation in there, the resistances, which would be less than a love situation. But this is why love would transmute then all of the negative emotions that we would have. We in harmony, sir? Okay. Sometimes it takes a long time to work around the meaning of words. Did Ingrid disappear? Oh, okay. All right. Any questions now as we move along? But this business on emotions and feelings and so on, people, there's wars fought over this. And it's not necessary. The thing is to find out what do people mean, and find out what their words mean, and find out what, and this sort of thing. And kind of if we can work through that, we find out that sometimes we're speaking the same language. But we have to work through all that undergrowth. Yeah, I appreciate it, Tom. I appreciate it. I appreciate all that's been said here. It all has a place. Ian, you're sitting quietly. Rex.
Okay, so we get people that are in the healing business, and they say, "I feel that this is wrong with you," or "I feel that this is what's going on with you." Now,
What's new?
yeah, and I for me, that's just nonsense.
I feel I should put my hand here on your forehead for half an hour.
Right.
Or 45 minutes,
Right.
45 and a half minutes to be exact.
Right. So therefore, there's no logic in that at all.
Okay, you cannot judge on spiritual evidence alone.
Right.
And so a lot of people, they don't talk about it, but they got a little voice sitting on their shoulder telling them every little thing to do, when to eat, when to sleep, when to have sex, when to do this, when to do that. And it guides and directs their lives. And they also come in here and start hearing this little voice tell them what to tell people in the diagnostic sense. And they lead people down the primrose path that people believe them. And, they say, oh, that's logical. I've got that problem, and this must be the solution for it. And they've lost the ability to reason for themselves and stand on principle. This is where, this is kind of a strong language. But, Rex, I have to agree with you on that. This is what's happening oftentimes. And maybe you haven't seen it here in this room. Maybe you haven't seen it in other healers' actions. They come up and tell you, you've got to take these 3 little pills at least once a week to get rid of this terrible condition that you have in your medulla oblongata. And then you say, Perk, what problem do I have in my medulla oblongata? And they've got you right then when you even give credence to what they say. And then they say, oh, don't you know? You've got this terrible parasite situation in the medulla oblongata. I can see it. You've got this terrible worm, and the only thing that's going to get this little worm out of there are these 3 little pills. Look, folks, I run across this every day of the week with people coming up to me and say, so-and-so said I've got this problem, I've got liver flukes, I've got flukes in my groin, I've got parasites in my brain, and I look at that and I say, oh my gosh, and these people are coming to an instructor seminar. Present company accepted, okay? But I hope that some of us can start putting away our childish games, as Rex has pointed out here, and quit being led around by these little voices that tell you how many parasites a person has. You can ask the person, well, how many parasites do I have in my left ear? Oh, you got about 3,000, let's see, 3,102. Nonsense. Doug.
I don't know how much detail you want to go into on this, but I'm just reminded of something here that you shared with a VNC class many years ago. And you spoke about a time in the future when there would be a temporary situation on the planet here when basically the light would be withdrawn and people would find themselves in the boat where they were forced to do nothing, but basically they would have to depend on nothing but principle. That's all that would be left to them would be principle, and they would either stand by principle or they would, refuse to stand by principle. But there would be a certain moment at which all exterior sources of light would be withdrawn from the planet, and that's what I'm kind of reminded of in all this is that we're all, to one extent or another, looking outside of ourselves much of the time, and really, in a lot of ways, when we're following our feelings, that's still what we're doing is we're looking outside of ourselves because our feelings are generally triggered by external influences. We don't even, half the time, even see what those influences are. And it just seems to me in all of this discussion that what it keeps coming back to is that sooner or later, if we're going to move up the evolutionary pathway, we're going to have to get to a point where we're going to govern ourselves according to principle. And to me, it seems like most of what most of us are doing in a lot of ways is forestalling the inevitable. Because when we're trying to make decisions in our lives, I mean, people are getting out the tarot cards and, going to the astrologers and looking at their numerology and, looking everywhere except for to principle.
Have I showed you my new set of runes?
Not recently. And I just don't see a lot of I don't see a lot of reliance on principle. I don't see a lot of adherence on principle in most cases, and it seems to me that we probably will get to a point eventually where we'll have no choice but to live by principle, and that's why that always kind of rang true with me. You know what I'm talking about?
I remember what you're saying. I think I was very foolish for uttering it. I should never have said that. It'll happen, though.
Yeah.
Just like I said. It will. When the time of cleansing comes on this planet, which will yet happen, every single being will be left entirely on their self, on their own volition, to see whether they'll follow correct principle or not. And there'll be nobody there to help them and buoy them up. Because every person must learn to stand as a tub stands on its own bottom without relying upon any external source. Because if God is going to use a people, so to speak, the hierarchy, if they're going to use a people, then people will have to prove themselves at a certain point in time to find out if they're totally dedicated to the principles they have chosen to learn, or if they're going to go down with the rest of the people where they're governed only by their feelings and emotions. I think I said just about that same thing back years ago.
Yeah.
That's about it. That's yet to come, and it will happen. But it'll happen in a strangest way because it'll happen suddenly. And all of us are going to have to be where we're supposed to be at that time, or else we'll get caught up in a real disaster of a fray. And hopefully we can all be protected at that time during that moment, because it'll not be a very nice one. Yes, sir.
I'm in no way disputing correct principle, but if you go back in history a little bit to somebody like Edgar Casey, who obtained information from a source that is referred to on quite a few occasions as the Akashic Records, he got things right, and he helped and fixed a lot of people, and he never met most of them.
Did Edgar Casey ever make a mistake?
Well, not that I've read, but I don't know entirely the total source of Edgar Casey. He got an awful lot right, let's put it that way.
Were all of his prophecies spot on?
I'm not discussing the prophecies. I'm talking about his concept of healing and helping people, which is what we are basically dealing with here.
His concepts of the future came from exactly the same source as the concepts for healing.
Yes, that I understand.
Okay? And so therefore, if you have 100 right things that Casey said and did, which were quite miraculous and quite phenomenal, then people will start giving him credit for being a sleeping prophet, which was the name that he was in, and he was into a trance state, a deep trance state, whenever he gave these things, and they were shown to him in this trance state, but he never recalled a thing consciously because he couldn't remember them. Right?
Yes, right.
Okay, I've studied Edgar Casey. Okay, I know where he's coming from.
Yes,
And the thing is his particular information was a very high source from the astral realm. And many of his prophecies never happened.
Yeah, maybe that's true. I don't know. What I'm trying to get at is that there is a reality about what is happening there that I personally accept.
Well, you can accept that because you had a very good person who was in the astral realm that has tremendous access to all the information that they need. The dark forces have all that power to train people and to get people involved in what they're doing, and to give them all the information that they want. If they can get you and have you going for it, and Edgar Casey was in that capacity. His information was valid. People were taken in by it, and so after a while, the people agreed with Edgar Casey, hook, line, and sinker on everything they said. And there, the dark forces win another battle.
So just to go over it again, you're saying that it isn't a reliable source of information?
Absolutely not. It's a partial source of information. It came from the astral realm. But take a look at how it came. It came from how? Channeled sources while he was unconscious. It didn't come from a conscious source.
Okay.
Now, if it comes from a conscious source, from your prayers, and doesn't come from some little imp that's trying to take over your body, oh, sure, he did a lot of praying. And I knew Reverend Bob Gordon. He was one of the most powerful materializing mediums in the world, tested by Dr. Ryan of Duke University. He'd sit down there behind a black curtain, and he'd be as healthy as you look to start out with. And after about 4 hours of his what they call materializing mediumship, he'd look like a corpse coming out with big black bags under his eyes, all sunk in and whatnot, as the entity just used him up. Was he accurate? You bet. He had me going for quite a little while, until I began to realize where the source of his information came from. Do you know who told me that? Bob Gordon himself. He said, John, he says, they've got me and they won't let me go, and I can't sleep anymore. He died shortly thereafter because he was totally taken over by the evil spirits. And he said, I can't beat them. He said, I don't know what to do anymore. I started out thinking I knew what I was doing. I've done a lot of pray on this, and I've done a lot of different training with different people on this. He says, they've got me and they won't let go of me, and I'm dying. And he did. You with me, sir? You got to be careful about who you listen to in any type of a clairvoyance or any type of a seance, or else you get taken in by it very readily. And don't you think that they don't want to take over your body and take over somebody else's body. That's where you have to go yourself through prayer with all the dedication you can muster up. And if you get an answer, you still have the right to question it. Okay? And to prove all things and hold fast that which is good. And don't swallow everything like a pill. I've done it. I've swallowed things like a pill. That's how I've learned some bad experiences. I've got my fingers burned a few times. And you think you're doing right, and you're very sincere at the moment that you do it. But you still get your fingers burned. Okay. Who's first? Sama?
I came up here because I became totally confused. My first question is, for about 50 years now, you've been struggling to find the truth. And to be where you are now, you've come across all these tarot cards, all those, and all this, and you've been reading and studying them. But how do you react? Just because we are all now struggling to find the path, and all these things are coming across our way. And I don't just know what to do, whether just to kick it and say, go away. And then, I don't just know. Why do I stop my inquiry on the path to the truth? You've not asked me to stop my inquiry, but I've been put in a state where everything becomes very skeptical.
That's exactly where you should be. Not believing all the Tom, Dick, and Harry things that go on out here. Prove all things. And hold fast that which is good.
Okay. Now, my second question is...
That puts the responsibility right on your shoulders, doesn't it?
My second question is about this voyage to Mars, where we are now sending crafts to the Mars and other planets. Now, sorry, my second question is now it's totally related. It's about the spaceship being sent to Mars. And a few days ago, we were talking about the planets, how they are being prepared for propagation by God. So I was wondering what would be the effect once you started interfering with the other planets, that's the people from this planet. Once you started interfering with the things on the other planets, if they can get there, how will God take this?
It's not the time for all that.
What do you mean?
It's not the time for all of that.
What's not the time for all that?
You don't want to go to another planet.
I don't want to go there, but people like NASA is sending a spaceship to Mars.
Let them send their spaceships up there. A lot of them don't come back.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about the little voices sitting on the shoulder. I know a couple people who walk around and continuously being directed by these little voices, seemingly quite harmless. Most of the time, though, I haven't had any long record to watch what's going on. Is it just a good standard principle to get these people exercised, or what? How do we get rid of these little voices?
You know how to get rid of the little voices. The thing is, you have to educate people to know that if it's from God, people are taught correct principles, and then they are left to govern themselves. But these little voices, once they get a hold of you, they tell you when to eat, when to sleep, when to do this, when to do that. They tell you, I mean, they're there all day long whispering in your ear. You've seen that? Good. And that is proof enough. Now, when you have to pray for 6 months or a year to get an answer to prayer, and you work for it, and then you get an answer for prayer, and you prove the doggone thing out, you know you're on the right path. But the thing is, if you're getting a prayer for when you blow your nose and when you brush your teeth and when you do this, and I know of people who've been in that boat, that this is not of God.
David was talking about Edgar case, and I could see the little doubt in his mind after having believed that he was okay. I had my doubts as well. And what Sama was also talking here, I know where he's coming from. If you want to know about people who have been living guided and directed by the little voices and so on, you come to Africa. Because there are times when we don't, before we do anything, we have to have the shaman. I'm not talking about the real people who used to pray and get answers. I'm not talking about those old ones whose duty was to pray. They would sit in the silence and they would sometimes go out and just pray. Then when they came back, they would be able to talk. And that was for the whole clan. Once a year that happened. And they would do these celebrations of joy or whatever thing. I'm talking about the charlatans which are now filling the country. And Edgar Cayce was a sleeping prophet. That means he prophesied when he wasn't conscious. In Africa, almost, especially if you go to Benin, Nigeria, and so on, you would see loads of girls, virgins, who would be dancing and they would go into trance. And in some churches also, and what they tell you, they can tell you when you were born, where you come from, details. And sometimes it is really difficult not to believe them. Because they can even tell you what you ate in the morning and the whole works. It's so detailed.
Phenomena.
Yeah, they tell you everything.
Very accurate.
I don't know what happened, but I always had difficulties in believing in them. I didn't believe in what the priests told me in the churches, and I didn't believe also what those people or the soothsayers told me either. And I do not know why I didn't believe in them, but now I'm happy that I didn't. But most of our lives in Africa has been ruled this way. A person would go and give a lot of money to one of these people so that some other person could be gotten there, and they would say, God decided that this person should be in that position and this one should be out. So, and these voices are really very subtle. I do not think, maybe in the Western world you have it, but they are really, really very subtle. And they all truly come from the astral world. I believe very strongly that Edgar Cayce had his reading from a very high part of the astral world, but still the astral world. All in all, what I personally believe is that I would rather make my mistakes, my choice, my mistakes, than let somebody lead me, even whoever, to go make that mistake. I feel freer that way, or I am freer that way. So maybe it helps, Leo.
Thank you, Esther. Sama.
Just a comment about that aspect. From my experience in Cameroon, I got to the point when I actually said to myself that the soothsayers, and even most of the old ones in the village, they could be quite accurate. But the only thing that saved me was that they had no sense of time. They could tell you what will happen, but they didn't know exactly when it will happen. So when I realized that time in the other world was an illusion, then I lost faith in them.
One thing, you're going to have to look at something here for one moment, sir. Many of the soothsayers would go into a trance, and they'd have to go into a trance to get their information, at which time they would be dictated to by the spirits and told this and told that, and then they'd come back and tell the people. And oftentimes they would even say that it was their ancestors that spoke to them, or Chief so-and-so, who existed, say, 3 or 4 centuries before, that spoke to them. And perhaps this was so. Perhaps this was so. But it still came through the wrong channels. Now, our job is to be individually responsible, to pray continually, to do everything we can that we're worthy of prayer, to live our lives faultlessly in such a way as best we can, so that we can be open to and understanding the prayer when it comes. And then, as Esther has said, be brave enough to make our own mistakes. She didn't say that, but that's what her attitude is. She's going to make her own mistakes, and she'll bear the consequences of those mistakes. And she'll do it with a smile on her face, because she did it, and she did it good. Right, Esther? And that's the way it is. And this is the attitude all of us should have, rather than putting our life lock, stock, and barrel on some little wizard that mutters and peeps, and comes through some sort of a seance, of which we have absolutely no guarantee of where they're coming from. So I'm glad we discussed this. I hope this has helped some of you to understand these things, because they're very real. These seances are very real. The witchcraft covens are very, very real. Is there power there? You bet there is. But you and God are a majority, and you keep that in mind, please. We have Rex coming up.
I work with a lot of Maori people, and my dilemma is, for me, is being skeptical, is to try and get it right each time, because their spiritual part is very real to them, and my spiritual part is very real to me. So what I find is I get challenged regularly, and I leave myself open because I quite often don't know what's going to happen from what I say, and then the challenge comes later. And so I'm just warning people, because as you get into this business, the deeper you seem to get, the more challenges you get, and it takes a real focused person to actually stay there. And I mean, it's evidenced by the number of exorcisms I've had since I've been involved in body electronics, that I wasn't cleaning myself. I wasn't able to keep those challenges out as good as I thought I was doing. So I'd just like to tell everybody to take it one step at a time, and to stay true to yourself, and to accept your mistakes, and to realise when you've made a mistake, to do something about it really quick, and and recognise it in some way. I was hoping that'd be a bit of help to people.
I've got a question concerning transmission of divine information from the right source, because evidently it happens that an ascended master comes in the human form, and maybe you can shake his hand, maybe he doesn't extend his hand. Now, I've heard reference to golden lights that were in question as to what side of the light they were on. And in Book 1, I'm just reading this passage where you're writing about a white light entering into the room where I was praying, moving in through the walls, and the Venetian blinds from my left. Now, my level of discernment is starting to get fuzzy around
Good.
this.
For every truth, you'll have a counterfeit for truth. And sometimes it's going to take a very difficult ability to discern as to what is true and what is not true. What I wrote, I don't repent of, because that's the way it was.
There's a passage in, I think it might be 2 Thessalonians, but there's a passage that says something to the effect that they might be given strong delusion that they might believe a lie, and that even the very elect might be deceived. So that, as John's pointing out here, and as Matthew has brought up, there's going to be a counterfeit for every truth. And this is, again, as John has stated earlier, this is why you shouldn't ever judge on spiritual evidence alone. So no matter what the source of information appears to be on the surface, no matter how valid it would appear to be, you still have the responsibility not to follow it blindly, but you have the responsibility to very, very carefully consider that information and really prove it out. And if you look at what John's referring to in that book there, he's talking about an experience that he had over 30 years ago. And so he's had a lot of time to, weigh and measure that information. He's had, not just a couple of days or a couple of months, but he's had, 30 or almost 35 years to consider that information. And my understanding is,
less than 35 years.
Yeah, and my understanding is you've never yet found it lacking in any way. So that's a pretty good track record. So when you look at that kind of thing, Matthew, you may not know right when you get it absolutely 100% for certain whether it's going to be valid or not. But you got the rest of your life to figure it out. You got the rest of your life to look at it and really study it and consider it and apply it and see where it leads you. So it's not always there's another alternative, I guess, between just either accepting it completely or rejecting it entirely, and that is to really ponder it and think about it and study up on it, which is what John has done for many, many years.
So bottom line, you cannot make any decision based on the form and the manner that it's imparted. Bottom line, you cannot make a decision as to the quality of the information or the divine source of the information based on the form and the manner it's imparted. You have to go by the content and your experience through life with it.
Prove it out.
Yeah,
If it doesn't check out under extreme scrutiny, then forget it.
And that same line, the thing to consider is you'll get sources of information that will be, again, back to the phrase I used earlier, there will be information that will deceive the very elect. There will be sources of information that will be, it'll be very, very difficult for you to figure out where they're wrong. And one of the things is that, you can have 100 things revealed to you, and the dark forces don't much care if they gave you 95 things that are right, as long as they were able to slip in 4 or 5 that weren't, because that 4 or 5 is enough to totally screw you up if you follow them and if you believe them. So the thing to realize is a lot of people think, well, all this other stuff that came from this source is true, so it must all be true. And that's not how the dark forces work. They're quite happy to give you a bunch of truths, quite happy to give you a whole bunch of things that are actually true and accurate, as long as they can slip a few over on you. And then the flip side of that, too, is one thing that's very dangerous for a progression is to accept a lie, is to accept something that's not really true. But something that's often equally dangerous is for us to accept half a truth. And so, you have the one situation where the information is going to contain something that is actually a falsehood. And, a person may or may not have enough discernment to see that. But another situation, which is probably even more insidious, is where you get half a truth. You get part of a truth, and it is true, but it's only one side of things. And by not revealing to you the other side, that can screw a person up pretty badly as well if they, start to live their life according to a half-truth. So this is again why, as John said, you have to really weigh and measure everything and really prove it out over maybe months or years or longer before you really can, know for certain that it is actually all true.
Anybody else? Any comments? Feel free.
In November 1994, I did a course in something called Alpha Dynamics, and we were taught to go into the alpha level of consciousness and access. Well, we were taught how to do healing through this awareness that we were seemingly getting, and what we did was we were given the name and the age and the place of a person. And what we had in this course also done was develop our own workshop there, where we then took the person into the workshop and actually saw the person and described the person to the one that had, given you the age group and the place and the name of this person, which could be a family member or a friend. And it seemed to work extremely well. Like I could visualize very clearly the person that I had in my workshop just as clearly as you are sitting here before me today. And I could scan this person with my hands or even feel on my body where this person needed healing. Can you please comment on that?
Were you conscious the full time? Yeah. And you could visualize all this? Yeah. Good. What does Reiki do with absent healing? Same principle. And so the thing is, if you visualize, for example, your mother, and you send her love and surround her with love and surround her with happiness and beauty and all these things, what are you doing to your mother? You're loving her and healing her, because when you send love to a person with full consciousness, you help them to heal.
But wasn't a voice from the astral realm coming down telling you about this person?
There's no voice coming down telling anything, was there? No. You're choosing to do it of your own volition. I don't see a problem there. Because you're fully conscious, you weren't being dictated to by some little mutterer, somebody, a little wizard that mutters and peeps on your left ear, and you gotta stay away from those things. Okay, no problem. You're fully conscious. Peter.
I can relate to what Rex was talking about before, this, being torn between different loyalties when it comes to spirituality. And this goes back a few years for me, but I I was presenting seminars around the country, and I always seemed to attract the born-again Christians would be picketing the hall outside and with their placards and handing out leaflets to everybody. And then I had a bit of a change in my consciousness where I came to the realization that there's truth in all things, but no one thing has all the truth. And instead of being, fanatical, pushing what I believed in, all of a sudden things started to change for me, and no longer were the born-again Christians there. I mean, there's more born-again Christians than ever before, but I don't seem to attract them anymore, and I don't have that problem. And talking about, well, this just relates to me, okay? This is how I discern if something is the truth for me or not. Now, I better preface this, I believe if I can't do good, then I ought not do harm. And so usually, I wouldn't talk about things like this, but it's been brought up a lot over the last 20 minutes or so. So the only writings that I've got with me from, say, the I Am movement, something that was in the point of contact from the Adelaide Body Electronics magazine. And, I go back and say again that there's truth in all things, but no one thing has all the truth. And for me, the way that I can discern if it's truth for me, I can discern, if this is the sort of thing that a high soul would say. The reading is, I wonder if you comprehend what it means to be an ascended master or a cosmic being and have to listen to the heart cries, the calls of mankind throughout the centuries for release from pain. We have listened to that a very long time. Now, I suppose you can look at it a lot of different ways, but to me that's someone having a bit of a whinge or complaining or stuff like that. And to me, like, high souls don't do that. And on the next page, I mean, it's just, I could pick at any paragraph really, but it says, mankind has imposed some unpardonable things upon it, because that which is not pure is impure. Now, to me, like, a high soul doesn't say things like that either. Like, to a high soul, to the pure, all things are pure. Yeah, so this is that's from the I Am movement, Saint Germain Foundation, Beloved Lord, the Maha Charms Discourse. So, like just coming back to, some people take a pill that they just swallow and that's that. But like Esther says, your version of Esther's things, that we can make our own mistakes and we can discern what's true for ourselves. But the thing that has worked for me is that there's truth in all things, but no one thing has all the truth. And let's face it, I think that if we were to pass on right now, then the chances are we'd be a high source on the astral plane too until we sort ourselves out and recycle. And my question is, like, why would a high soul channel things, which is, the chosen, that's the preferred way for a confused soul or an entity to get their message across to here on planet Earth. They can't come here and do it themselves. They find some dummy who can go into full trance and write it all down and publish some books. Why, do they use the same, why would an ascended master use the same method that a confused soul would? In other words, channeling. Why don't they come here and speak in front of us?
I think you're entitled to your opinion, sir. It's just like I'm reminded of when a person, my mind is made up, don't confuse me with facts.
I feel very strongly, Peter, that you've used that out of context. What was said, what was being said then, he was speaking with regard to the anguish he was feeling because of the thoughts that we were thinking. The ascended masters can actually feel the negativity that we're putting out onto ourselves, and it affects them. I think it was used in that context.
Oftentimes we are very quick to judge based upon a couple little things that we see, and this is often just sheer foolishness, where if we just set it upon the shelf for a while and investigate very thoroughly. This is the pathway of a wise man.
This is why the Ascended Masters asked that nothing be copied and put out a little bit piecemeal. People will pick it up. People will pick it up and pull it to bits. They won't take the time to read the whole books.
Okay. Any other comments?
I've got a friend that made a comment about Ascendant Masters. It was probably the first time I'd ever heard it even described. She said that an Ascendant Master could come down anytime they liked. They didn't need to bother with channels. The reason she said that quite often they didn't was that you don't know who they are. They need an identity that's credible to you. Otherwise, how do you know who they are? I mean, I don't know what Jermaine looks like or any of these other people that you're talking about. And so they've got the ability to come here, but if you don't realise who they are, what good is it going to do?
You still have to look at the information that's being presented. I mean, again, regardless of the source, even if you got levels of law, you got many, many different gradient levels of law, from relatively lower levels to relatively higher levels. And the thing to consider is even if a certain law or principle is in and of itself accurate and true, that doesn't mean that it's actually of any value to a person. Because if a person's at this level of understanding, then a truth that's up at this level is only going to get misapplied and lead to the person's detriment, really. So, I mean, regardless of whether the information is valid or not, Jan, it's still an individual thing to very, very carefully consider the principle that's there and see if there's any use you can make of it. Because one of the worst things that you'll have is you'll have people that are trying to apply, they're 10 steps ahead of themselves, they're trying to apply a law that they've got no business applying, and all they're going to end up doing is screwing themselves up in the process because they haven't gone, they're trying to do step Z and they've skipped, A through X or whatever. I mean, they've got a lot of other things that they're going to have to go through. So the thing about it is if you have information that comes to you that's supposedly from an ascended master, if you can't understand it, or if you can't see any meaningful way to apply it in your life, then ultimately it's not of any value to you anyways, regardless of whether it's true or not. And I think that's something that gets overlooked a bit. We've got a lot of different levels of law, and it's just like you're teaching somebody. You don't give them what you can handle, you give them what they can handle. Because if you give a person more than they can handle, you haven't helped them at all. You've probably, in some cases, you've actually harmed the person or driven them backwards. So there's another side to that as well there.
Just wanted to ask a question and give a principle that I was given. The question is, what good is all of the information in the world if you're not aware of who you are, what your purpose is, and what you're doing now? And the principle is just to have a conscious awareness of the moment, of your own breathing, of your own body, of all of the sensations within your current realm of experience, and to stay ever watchful and ever conscious of the energy patterns as they change around you, and to stay conscious of these things and not lose awareness of them while intellectualizing a principle.
I would agree with that in part, but bottom line is none of us are even remotely capable yet of really knowing who we are or what our purpose is or what our mission is, because we're all still so reactive. So it sounds great in theory, Kyle, but I don't think any of us here are in a position to do that. We can begin to do it. I mean, we can do it as best we can, but I think we're talking maybe 1% success if we're lucky.
Yeah, the basic principle that I quoted wasn't always to be perfectly aware of identity and purpose and so on. The principle is just to awareness in the moment while thinking of grander notions.
If you consider the melanin protein complex, which is deeply embedded in all of us, pretty much in every cell of the body, every one of us is awash in a sea of information or a sea of light. The vast majority of that light is intercepted by the melanin protein complex and never reaches the mind in the first place. So we can say, yes, I want to start off from a state of awareness, but it's simply not possible. It's simply not possible from where we're at. We're in a state of tremendous reaction where most of the light around us never makes it anywhere near the mind because it's intercepted by the crystals. So to me, you have to start somewhere, and the best place to start is with principles, because if you can apply those principles, you can begin the process of overcoming the melanin protein complex, which is what you're going to need to do to increase that awareness.
At our very, very best, we see through a glass darkly. We see in part, we think we know and we don't know. We hear in part, we think we hear and we don't hear. Now, this is the thing that has bothered me the last few days. And you have a seat, Kyle, because I know where you're coming from on this situation. But I'm going to have my say on this matter. People who appear to be intelligent have taken upon themselves to very severely judge other people. I mean, judge harshly other people without knowing any facts involved. And so I have spent several hours on working with situations the last couple, 3 or 4 weeks, where people don't know because they're not walking in another person's moccasins. And yet they judge heavily because they think they know, which is a common weakness that every human being has. Now, this is wherein we can be correct in what we see or what we think we see, but remember, at the very best, we only see the very tip of the iceberg as to that which is transpiring in another person's life or in another person's mind. That's all we see. We see only in part. But in our grandiose egos, we make up minds of judgments as to what this other person is up to, where they're coming from, and where they're going. And we create tremendous dissent among other people when we start expressing ourselves from a limited point of view. And I'm as guilty of this as anybody else is. And I'm quite aware that over the years I have been guilty of this and get sucked in to various people problems and thinking I knew when I didn't know, and then having to once again make my mind up ahead of time not to allow myself to get in a position of judgment on other people's circumstances or what they do. Now, this still bothers me because our very best, no matter how intended our efforts are, oftentimes we have our mind made up as long as we hope that nobody confuses us with facts involved. And this can be reading a book and getting sunk into reading a part of a book. I know of one guy, he puts his entire philosophy regarding Saint Germain on one paragraph of a book that he opened one time, and he read it and expresses it totally out of context because he doesn't know the circumstances under which that particular article or idea was written. I know of people who have picked up one little article on Yogananda and have condemned Yogananda to hell because they're not using the right words or not expressing things the right way. according to somebody's fundamentalist belief system. And the world is full of this type of bigotry. The world is full of it. What do we do with it? You do the best you can with it, and you just carry on. And each of you will have to carry on at doing what you're doing. Doing what you're doing from the best of your ability, from the best of your conscience. Nobody can expect you to do anything more or less. So I just want to share that with you. Carol, is your hand up? Carol, did you want to say something? That's a question. That's my question. Did you want to say something? I love this type of arm movement.
It seems to me that we're all trying to fight our way out of paper bags, and it reminds me a bit of the cube existence. It's not much further than that.
Thank you.
I just wanted to mention, for those who are asking, how you know things and what's real and what's not real, in particular to Jan, is that you, through my own experience, and it's only my own experience, that you can actually stop, even if it's only in your mind, and saturate every single cell in your body with pure motive, intent, unconditional love, and unconditional forgiveness. And you can guarantee nothing that isn't pure will be able to exist in that realm.
Okay, any other comments here now? We go on. The spleen, the blue spots in the sclera, are going to be totally full of, I can't believe this, I can't accept that, I can't consider that, and you're going to find that these block off the person's ability to have faith, to be able to apply laws, because of the tremendous amount of unbelief that exists among humanity. And we're not without that here in our individual lives, because we don't understand yet. So let's be patient with ourselves, and that should be our first most important step, and not be too quick to cast ourselves to the wolves because we don't understand something. But this is a very common thing, and the spleen level is much higher than the level 7, wherein people have their mind on one thing and one thing only, and that is sexual reproduction without responsibility. And so here's where we move up to a level of social interaction without responsibility. And it boils down to where people have their mind made up. They don't want to be confused with facts. They don't want to study. They don't want to learn. They just want to go out and do what they're doing emotionally, justifiably. I can't survive without this, or I can't do that. And it's your whole life will be governed that way. Doug, anything you want to say there, please, before we go on?
That's right.
Pardon me? No. I didn't really consider it quite that way. This is a blood vessel with a little blue spot on the end, and this happens to be another blood vessel with a blue spot on the end, and so on. But I imagine that we see things from where we see things. Now we go on a little bit further where we get these heavy blue spots in the sclera, and they can be all shapes and sizes and go all the way around, etc. Now these are different than the medial and the lateral points for the thymus and for the heart. And as you look at enough eyeballs, you'll be very quick to see the differences in the blue blotches of the thymus and the heart as differentiated from the blue spots in the sclera. Now, these are just heavy blue spots. Oftentimes, you find this connected with chemical toxicity. Any questions there? Yes, Elizabeth. Which part? Remember we talked about the blue blotch medially and laterally for both the thymus and the heart. Remember? Okay, these are not to be confused with what we discussed before. These are very definitely pigmented spots. They do not have the same cast or the same color or structure as the thymus and heart points. All righty? Okay, going on. Around the iris, we often have a narrow blue ring. Very, very narrow blue ring, and that is called the what? Anemia ring. So this is what we will call the anemia ring. And oftentimes the people with the anemia ring, the way we correct that is a recognition that there is a blockage here in the ability of the body to handle oxygen, which is oftentimes due to an absence of hemoglobin. Now, the work that has been done by Dr. Louis Kervran, again, is where we use tremendous amounts of magnesium in the system, and that magnesium in the form of chlorophyll will biologically move into a hemoglobin molecule, and that's through the biological transmutation. Next. And then that blue ring will slowly disappear. Now, oxygen is very, very important. And here's you have the wide blue ring around the iris. And this is a huge, wide blue ring all the way around the iris, and I'd like Doug to talk to you about this for a few moments.
The way this is going to look is this entire area from the edge of the iris out about this far, this whole area, it's not just a blue ring out here, it's this whole area that's going to be blue from here to here, all the way around. And this is something that in this day and age, you'll find this in virtually 100% of the people that you'll read eyes on. If you go back historically, I think the first time John ever saw these was in about the late 1970s or so. Early 1980s, John began to see this in a relative minority of people. Very, very, very few people at first. I know when I first started studying with John in 1985, he didn't really have any idea what it was, at least as far as what he was, I don't know what he thought privately, but as far as what he was teaching in courses, he wasn't really too sure about it. All he was saying at that time in 1985 was that you were starting to see it in more and more people. It had appeared within the last 4 or 5 years before then, and I think at one point you were speculating that it was related to ELF waves. You know, this is maybe 10, 12 years ago.
And I did see it in people who were exposed to radiation from the ELF waves.
Yeah.
You know what ELF waves are? Extremely low frequency waves. And I saw this from around Hayward, Wisconsin at the time, where the people up there were around this Clam Lake naval transmission, underground transmission thing that's supposed to go all the way through the earth. And these people were dying of different cancerous problems. All the women are having miscarriages, and all the people were sick living in that area. It was just a terrible catastrophe, the people who were exposed directly to these ELF waves.
I can remember in 1985, you know, looking in people's eyes, and we found that in some people, but certainly there were plenty of people that didn't have this wide blue ring. In fact, they didn't even have a faint one. There was no trace of it in quite a few eyes. And even just from about 85 to maybe 87 or 88, you got to the point where it was the minority of people that you started, where it was the minority of people that had the blue ring. And I would say by maybe no later than about 1988 or so, it was the majority of people. It was practically everyone that had it. And in this day and age, it'd be very, very unusual to find anybody that wouldn't have at least a faint blue ring like this. And another thing, too, is that it used to be maybe 5 or 6 years ago that when you found them in people, where John has come to the point where he's seeing that one of the prime things that you're dealing with here is an oxygen deficiency in the tissues. It used to be maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago that if somebody had one of these blue rings, you could still overcome it. I mean, you could get them on a good heavy program, lots of oxygen, lots of chlorophyll, and so forth, and you could generally get the blue ring to disappear. We've gotten to the point now where not only does virtually everybody have it, but it seems to be a very, very, very difficult thing to get rid of. I mean, even people that are on pretty heavy programs, taking lots of oxygen and lots of chlorophyll, will still typically have this ring. So basically in 15 to 18 years, we've gone from nobody having this to some of the people, to all of, or most of the people, to all of the people, and to the point now where virtually everybody has it, and it's very, very difficult to get rid of this. This relates to the work of Dr. Walter Russell, where he put forth the concept, I guess it would have been about 50 years ago, thereabouts.
1945.
1945. He put forth the theory that the use of nuclear energy in any way, shape, or form, whether for the generation of power or whether for use in bombs, would be very, very destructive to the oxygen content of the atmosphere, where he felt that basically some sort of transmutation would take place where you would see a gradual reduction of the amount of oxygen worldwide. And it does appear, based on what we're seeing here in the sclera of the eye, that you're getting quite an obvious change going on in people as far as the level of oxygenation in the tissues. This does, and looking at these blue rings and just looking at it from a perspective of 10 or 15 years, it's quite obvious that something pretty serious is going on. When you take something that's never been there, and within a 15-year period, it's present in everyone. And you figure John had been looking at eyes for 30 years prior to that and had never seen one once.
Let's go back to the Cook Islands. When I went from Hawaii to the Cook Islands, and that was back in 1989, we really didn't have any blue rings in the eye. None there whatsoever. We went to New Zealand, and there were no blue rings there that we could ascertain in the eye. Then by 1990, all of a sudden, we had blue rings in New Zealand. Remember that, Anita? And all of a sudden, everyone had it. We went back to the Cook Islands, and we were there in 91, and all of a sudden, everyone had it there. And I got a little bit alarmed because I couldn't figure out what the problem was, but I did know that when we got people on an oxygen program, that for the most part, the blue area around the eye would go away. Now, that was about 1991. By 1995, it didn't happen that way anymore. And more people were dying of cancer. Right and left, people were dying of cancer. And more people would try to get them on a program for oxygen to help to alleviate this blue ring around the eye. And it would be diminished in size, but we couldn't get that blue ring to go away. And this began to worry us a lot. And then this is when I found out, after doing my investigation, that Dr. Oppenheimer had formed an organization clear back during the Second World War, during the atomic bomb testing, to have a committee established to find out exactly how much oxygen was destroyed during a nuclear blast, or what effect it had on the Earth's atmosphere. That particular study was buried and never came to light. Now that's one thing. We still have yet to ferret out and find out where that came from. But that study and the findings of that organization, it never came to light. But one of the anti-nuclear fighters, who's the Queen's representative down in Auckland, New Zealand, he found a book which had all that information on it, but no evidence of the report. But the fact is that there was a report, and there was a finding that there was a destruction of oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere as a result of nuclear testing. That's way back in the 1940s. Now, this was where Walter Russell said very clearly, way back at that time, that the time would come when leukemia would be prominent, which would then be followed by massive outbreaks of cancer due to oxygen deprivation in the Earth's atmosphere, which we now have. And this would continue on until we would have viral invasions wherein masses of people would be destroyed by viruses because of the lack of oxygen that would be available for the maintenance of health. And so there's a lot of information here that needs to be looked at. We know places like Tokyo that they have these little snifters at every corner because in that polluted area there's not enough oxygen to sustain biological life. And people are very ill in Tokyo unless they get their oxygen supplementation on a regular basis. The same thing with some of the other major cities where pollution abounds. There's not enough oxygen. But what I will say this, we didn't see that blue ring until after the Chernobyl blast, which put radiation destructively all over the Earth. And even to the point where it's in New Zealand trees, where the New Zealand trees that are made for paper, there's so much radiation in the New Zealand trees now that it will destroy a photographic plate. And so this is one of the things we need to look at.
An X-ray plate, isn't it?
X-ray photographic plate, yeah. And this is powerful stuff. Anyway, this blue ring we're going to be living with. But we do need to have exercise to oxygenate our bodies, do a lot of deep breathing, and take oxygen supplementation to help reduce the size of that blue ring. Now, I hope you all understand that when the oxygen level in the bloodstream goes down, that you can then be wide open to parasite invasions, bacterial invasions, and viral invasions. And these things can come from any area. We might think the viral invasions can be because of the terrain or the medium in which the viruses develop. And I think that the pleomorphism that we've already talked about has a great deal to interplay here. But this oxygen problem right here is very real to all of us. May I have the next one, please? Doug, take that one if you would, sir.
Again, these indicating lines are not meant to be moving. We're just showing degrees of severity. The first thing that you're going to I've kind of thought the red spot came before the blue spot.
Sometimes they're interchangeable, looks like.
Yeah. At any rate, the red and the blue spots will be the earlier stages of problems here, and as it gets to be a gradually worse situation, you'll go to a brown spot, and then eventually you can go to a black spot on the end of an indicating line. You pretty definitely will have a tumor situation if you have a black spot on the end of an indicating line. That would be virtually always a tumor, and you're in pretty rough shape by the time you've got brown spots there as well. With the blue spots, as John has mentioned, if you've got 3 or more of those in each eye, you've got at least the low-level leukemia. And the red spot as well is going to be a problem there. Of course, when you're getting better, what you're going to watch is the reverse happen. If you start off with a black spot, it's probably going to turn brown, and then it's going to turn either red or blue, and then eventually disappear. So it'll go in both directions, hopefully.
Sometimes in one point holding, all the spots will disappear.
Okay, that we covered in the iridology course, but when you've got the blood vessel coming down and making a big fork right up at 12 o'clock in one or both eyes, that's your hiatus or a hiatal hernia. And I think we covered that sufficiently in the iridology week, and we've gone over a couple of times the type of sit-up that you'll do to correct that situation. Question?
In conversation with one of yeah, it's in conversation with one of the classmates here. I can't remember who we were discussing this with about this hiatal hernia. It came to point that there was a point on the foot that was mentioned, and maybe it would be good information for the class to realise that point.
It's a very simple point. It's where the esophagus enters into the stomach. And Bob, could you put your foot up here, please? Can you all see the foot from where you are? Okay, I want the top of the foot. I want the top of the foot. Now, bottom line, when you're dealing with a hiatal hernia, you take your finger right down between the first and second toes, and you come right down to where the bones actually come together in a little box canyon. And if you have a hiatal hernia, it'll be right in this spot, approximately right about in here. It'll be on top of the foot, but it's quite a ways up. But it's where the bones come together between the first and second toe. And all of this will be esophagus coming right up that little ridge, shall we say valley in that particular area. Right about in here. Any question on that? Now that's for a hiatal hernia. This would be a very important point. Any question? Can you all see from where you are? It's on top of the foot, between the big toe and the second toe, and you follow it right up until you come to the end of where you have that little valley, and it comes into a little box canyon right in there, and there'll be a very sore spot if you have a hiatal hernia or any problem where you have a rupture in that diaphragm area right at the base of the esophagus, which would be a hiatal hernia. Any question? Okay. Doug? We're on.
Would actually pressing that spot relieve the hernia? Oh, I'm talking myself, never mind. Would actually pressing that spot relieve the hernia in any way? Actually go some way to healing it?
Say that again.
Would pressing that reflex point on the foot go some way towards healing the hernia?
Yes. Yeah. Tell about Anne.
And oh yeah, but then she did she did the back one too, huh? She did both? Yeah, we had a lady in the Cook Islands who did that point on the foot 3 or 4 times, and she had a tremendous problem here, and it's cleared up. She also did the other maneuver too, but only once, I think, because once or twice. Yeah, because she couldn't do it. So she did the one on the foot.
It doesn't matter which foot. The points are bilateral, David. And what you do on one side will usually affect the other to a degree, not fully. Okay, Doug?
Okay, here we have a number of different enclosures in the sclera, and these will be areas where you have a complete circuit of blood flow, such as this, around an area, or such as this here. And in light of what John was talking about this morning, remember he was talking about how out laterally you'd have those 2 layers of blood vessels, where you might have a layer of blood vessels that was fixed and a layer of blood vessels that was moving. A lot of times people get confused when they look out in that area and they think they're seeing enclosures when in reality what they're seeing is different layers of blood vessels overlapping each other and giving the appearance of an enclosure. So you want to be very, very careful before you jump to the conclusion that you've got an enclosure, and take a real good look at it and make sure that it is really one continuous flow of blood all the way around an area. Now, if it is, you've got yourself a problem in that area, quite possibly a tumor, but very definitely an area where you've got a lot of problems. And what you'll notice here is also the other factor you're going to take into account is how far out from the iris is the enclosure, where, for example, this would probably pertain to something in zone 1, whereas this might be out in zone 6 or so, or even zone 7. But basically, look at where the enclosure is in relation to the iris, and that's going to show you what it's referring to in the iris. Like, for example, in this one here, you just follow that right in here, and you'd look somewhere in this area. Whereas with this one right here, you'd follow it in, and you'd probably be more out in this area, and as far as what it would refer to in the iris.
Any questions?
Bob? Did you have a question?
Bob, hang on a second. Anita, hang on here. That one up there, Doug, stand up and point to that one. I want you to look at that one really carefully, because this is when you really got a mean one up there. It's a well-developed tumor. Do you see all those red blood vessels coming in from 5 different directions? Now, this is one where you've got a problem, and you can identify that problem because it's usually going to be symptomatic, and the person will have symptoms in the area which will be directly down toward the center of the pupil. Any questions there? Okay.
Okay, sometimes in the sclera, you're going to see these yellowish deposits. In some cases, they're fairly subtle. In other cases, you really are looking at what appears to be like a glob of chicken fat or something there. And basically, this is going to indicate cholesterol buildup in the arteries. I'm sure all of you have seen situations where people had this, and it was very, very obvious, like literally just big globs of fat right there. Whereas in other cases, it's quite a bit more subtle. But it is cholesterol buildup or cholesterol deposits.
Pardon me? No, we're fine.
Okay, you all remember the oral chelation program? Anita?
We're using flax oil, number 18 lipase enzyme, niacin, high fiber diet, lecithin, thank you, and and also you make sure the person has given up all fried food. So you take them off of all kinds of fried food, and really check with them, because a lot of people don't understand that they're frying certain items. Like, for instance, they'll tell me they're having stir fry, and they'll think that's not fried. Or, they're like eating pancakes. They don't understand that's fried. So what I do is I have to actually ask them, what kind of foods are they eating? They think it's just like, fish and chips. So make sure they're off of all fried foods. And also I found it increases with like greasy stews, when people are making a lot of meats in water and boiling it for a long time, and then they drink all that fat.
I remember I went to a lecture with Udo Erasmus once, and he said that if for people who had these yellow blotches in their eyes, or people who were on who had to watch their diet because of high trans fatty acids, that practitioners should be telling them that once it starts to brown, it's toxic. The fat, yeah. So once your fatty food starts to go brown, it's toxic.
Okay, what you'll see a lot of times in the sclera in one or both eyes, usually both, at least in my experience, you'll see these horizontal blood vessels running back and forth up here in the brain area between about 11 and 1, and they're usually a bit up this way. They can come down pretty close to the iris, but they're usually kind of a ways up like that. Depending upon the person's bone structure, sometimes you really got to get them to look way down to be able to see these, because they can be way up there under the eyelid. But basically what you're dealing with there in many cases is a situation where there's been a lot of different types of toxic fumes and inhaled solvents and other sorts of things that have affected the brain tissue in particular. So you'd find this, for example, you might find this in a person that worked in a cabinet shop where they were constantly inhaling like shellacs and lacquers and that sort of thing. But basically it's typically going to be inhaled solvents that have been targeting the brain tissue. Okay, these are the allergy lines that we've seen in a number of people, where you've got a lot of fine blood vessels all the way around there, and as John has suggested a couple times previously, the root of your allergies is going to be problems there in your digestive system, particularly in your intestines, and faulty assimilation will be one of the main things here. And again, if you consider where these are found in the sclera, they're right in against the iris, which means that they are going to be referring into zone 1 in the iris. And of course, you'll remember you've got that overlap there, 360 degrees around within zone 1, where you've got your small intestines present there, which you won't find in your eye charts, but we did cover in the iridology week. Any questions on that? Okay, this is going to show basically a process of degeneration. Again, these indicating lines are not moving; they're staying in the same spot. But we're just showing the same line getting worse. And basically, you could start off with a indicating line that isn't coming in very close. You watch it at step 2 as it gets a little bit closer, and you watch it at step 3 as it gets closer still. You've gotten to this point here where the stress is no longer tolerable to the body, and it's starting to spread out a bit. And the first thing that you're going to form is kind of a wide Y right here. You note the angle of it there, so it's a wide Y. And then this is going to progressively start moving to a more and more narrow Y. And by the time you've got a narrow Y, you've got quite a serious problem. You've got a very advanced or severe state of stress by the time you get over here to a narrow Y. Sometimes that'll even fork out to form kind of even to join up into degeneration lines. And you may eventually also get an enclosure there at the end of the indicating line, which would be quite a serious situation as well.
There are iridologists, not iridologists, sclerologists, who claim that if you go over here to number 6, there where you have a narrow Y, that if you have a narrow Y like that, anywhere between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock, it is always going to be a brain tumor. And the person will have severe headaches. Now, that may be. I don't know about that. But these narrow Ys, people who have looked at hundreds of thousands of eyes, like Stu Wheelwright, will claim that that will be a brain tumor. And that would be of quite interest to me. I think Anita had one of those once. And what does Stu tell you?
I had a brain tumor.
And it may be. But that was years ago. We had a lot of changes there since then.
Could this be confused with a hiatus hernia?
It could be if it were 12 o'clock. But in this case, this particular thing is not a hiatus hernia, because that will only be at 12 o'clock. It won't be at any other positioning.
So if the Y is at 12 o'clock, it will only be a hiatus hernia. It wouldn't be a brain tumor.
If it's like that shape I showed you in the area there where you've got a definite hiatus hernia. If it's just a little tiny Y way up in the brain area, you may have a problem.
What was your reaction when you were told you had brain tumor by the practitioner?
Shock. Complete shock, but I've always had the word pattern. I can heal myself. I just did everything possible to take care of it. But the initial reaction was shock, yes.
Later on, downstream, Anita lost weight, went all the way down to about 95 pounds. She's just withering away. And we couldn't figure out what the problem was. And she upped her oxygen, if I remember. The rest is Anita's story.
Well, this is not about the brain tumor, but okay. Well, yeah, I upped the oxygen level, and then I passed this liver-type thing out of my colon, and it had hands on it. And it was all bloody, and it was just a mess. But just by upping my oxygen level, I went into diarrhea for 3 days, then cramping, severe cramping, and then it felt like something pulling off the lining of my colon wall, just pulling like a rubber band right off. And then I passed this thing about that big, type of liver-type thing with hands on it, all bloody. And then I passed another one the next day.
And that is when some changes took place in the eye that we had been working on for some years. But the thing is, how do you know what you've got until you are there, and then all of a sudden out it comes? Better out than in. But there are a lot of indicators in the eye that Anita had. But it's sometimes we are disbelievers that we don't work hard enough to get those things out of our system. Anita finally did. Okay.
Okay, again, we covered this in the iridology, but you'll have situations in many people where the sclera is pulled down over the iris to where it's obscuring part of the iris. This can take place all the way around the entire iris in some cases. It's almost always most pronounced, in other words, most overlapped in the upper extremities between about 11 and 1 in the brain area. And it's typically second most pronounced down across the bottom here, showing the lower extremities. But you will find some eyes where the arcus senilis is 360 degrees around. Basically, in whatever area is affected, like in this example, the brain area, you're going to have basically a very poor flow of nutrients and, well, basically a very poor flow of blood to that area of the body, to the brain area, meaning, of course, a poor flow of nutrients, a poor flow of oxygen to those tissues. So the person in this example is going to have a lot of problems with the brain. They may have memory problems, all sorts of things up there. Could be a lot of different causes. I mean, certainly neck problems might be one of them, but there's a lot of different things you're going to have to deal with here. Arcus senilis, as the name suggests, would be arc of senility, because when you have a very extreme one up in the brain area, it is frequently associated with different types of senile dementia. But in this day and age, you'll see arcus senilis even in very, very young people, because virtually everybody has poor flow of blood and nutrients and oxygen up to the brain nowadays.
After working with the Korean people, many of the Korean people are on heavy, heavy salt diets. Everything is salted to the limit. And every single one of them will have that arcus senilis, heavy arcus senilis, covering about half of their iris of their eye. It's quite an exciting thing to look at, because just one group of people with their diet will generate a situation where they cannot get the nutrients to the brain area. Okay?
The same thing we were just talking about, really. This is where you've got the arcus senilis all the way around, 360 degrees around. And in other words, the sclera is overlapping the iris, completely, or it's overlapping it all the way around. And this is going to show, basically, Jensen would call this anemia in the extremities. But basically, you've got very poor blood supply and nerve supply to the extremities, and the entire body by reflex is going to be suffering. What I've noticed over the years in looking at this is that, you know, even when you do have it 360 degrees around, it is quite often still even more so in the brain area. It's generally still going to be more pronounced here, and then maybe second most pronounced here across the bottom, because obviously if you're looking at the circulatory system and just taking gravity into account, the two areas where you're going to have the greatest degree of difficulty in getting the blood either to the area or from the area are going to be the top and the bottom, where the brain has takes up a tremendous amount of the blood, and of course you're trying to get things uphill there, so a lot of times the brain will be pretty severely affected. And then of course with the legs, for a lot of people, a big problem is going to be getting the blood flow, the return flow back up the legs. One minor thing that will be somewhat helpful for people with this would be the slant board, where you get on a slant board, head down and feet up a couple of times a day for 10 or 15 minutes. But that's not going to cure the problem. That's just one little extra thing that'll help. You're going to need a full program, lots of point holding, lots of work on the spine, in particular the neck. But you're probably going to have to start right from scratch to do anything here.
Last night, we went from table to table, and I was absolutely surprised. You ready? Oh, okay. We're on here. Okay. Well, last night we went from table to table, and so many people were burning in their pelvis, hip area. I'd like to see a show of hands of those that were burning in their hips. Get them high if your hips were burning through the pelvis area. It's an awful lot of people just, where you weren't holding points on the pelvis. I kind of wonder about the morphogenetic quality of that, and I'm just wondering if anybody is having strange pains in their hips that they hadn't planned on. Okay, this is interesting. Yes, sir. Is that right? Okay. It's an interesting situation here because we're having different things are happening to a good segment of the group, which is kind of abnormal, and I think we can attribute that to the morphogenetic resonance. I've got a whole flock of questions today, and these are questions that each of you, as instructors, will be confronted with in the people that you are working with. Question 1. I found increasingly that when I eat a meal and forget to take my enzymes, it feels like the food just sits in a blob in my stomach. Will taking enzymes from outside the body deplete the body's ability to manufacture its own enzymes? If no, then why does this happen to me? How many of you remember the indigestion that you used to have before enzymes came on to and the indigestion would be there, and you'd be constipated and problems, and the food would kind of sit on your tummy like a lump. And then you start taking enzymes, and then that problem disappears. And then suddenly, when you don't take your enzymes, what happens? The problem reappears again, oftentimes because we have not yet corrected the long-standing enzyme deficiency, which shows up as that zone 1 ring. Now, this takes a while to handle, but after a while, you can eat whatever you want to eat, so to speak, and you will find that you won't have that problem of that lump sitting there, and you will not have to take the enzymes on a regular basis at that time, because you'll find that your pancreas will start working for you. But as long as we still have a problem with the pancreas and the secretion of the pancreatic enzymes for digestion,